most likely to survive of everything I've said. After all, I've published now at least 20 million words, so I have to figure it out, maybe even more. But of all those millions of words that I've published, I am convinced that 100 years from now, only 60 of them will survive. The 60 that make up the 3 laws of robotics.
All right. It's interesting. Yeah, it is.
Listen, I'm not the great Tolkien scholar myself, but I've read the books. Not the Silmarillion, I haven't started yet, but from what I understand from my friends, they said basically there's a lot of you have thousands of years of the stories of the history of Middle Earth in many different novels, and Amazon is trying to condense that into a season or a couple seasons or two, which is totally wrong. You know, I have to go back to, and I'll bring this up on another film. If you've ever heard of Lair of the White Worm, 1988 movie, which was done by Ken Russell. Ken Russell is a good filmmaker. He's made some really unusual stuff on there. And if you've ever seen Lair of the White Worm, how bizarre on there it is. Actually, it's not the original story. See, the novel itself was written by Bram Stoker. Yes, the same Bram Stoker as Dracula. And the thing about it is, Ken Russell did not like the book. He didn't like the novel. He hated it. So he rewrote the entire novel. The script that he was using for the movie, and used elements of the book and created a different movie from what the book really was. And Russell added and subtracted characters from the original novel itself and created that bizarre movie. If you've seen Lair of the White Worm, you know what I'm talking about. So now we have the gentleman here who are creating supposedly the second age of Middle Earth that has nothing to do with the second age of Middle Earth other than the names of the characters, that they're elves and dwarfs, you know, and they put in diversity to the film itself. Now, here's the thing. There is a great book out there, and it's called The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. Take a moment and read that. There's some great letters that explains his writings, and you'll be shocked on a lot of the stuff that he wrote. Not shocked in a way, but shocked on how his legacy has been taken apart. So you have to understand one thing. When Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, he was looking not at English Europe. He was looking more toward the Celtics, the Scandinavians, the Norwegian on there, that whole era of the world. That's what he was looking at when he created that history. He was using a lot of the elements of the mythology from those people. And he created this world of Middle Earth. You know, you have those out there that says, well, you have to put Hispanics and blacks and Asians on that. They're not in that world. Do you understand? Yes, it's a fantasy world, but the fantasy world is based on a section of Europe in a time period where most of the different races were in their areas, where the Africans were in Africans, the Russians were in the Russians. You know, Asia was Asia, you know, in their continents. They weren't they weren't going around, you know, being in those territories. And people will say, well, you know, he was racist for not. No, he was writing a story for that part area. If you want to make a fantasy story, and you can do it, and it can be done, Because there are many stories from Africa. There are many stories from China, and there have been written about them, and Japan and Asia, that you can create many fantasy stories that can be interjected toward diversity as well, that it can be done. If you want to make African stories, it's possible. It is. You could do it. It is possible. The only reason you won't do it is because you're lazy. You want to take existing stories, and just create them with diversity in them, which doesn't work. They don't work well. Why? Because the period pieces are in a time period where, okay, let me put it in this perspective. When they say diversity, they say, well, we don't have enough blacks, we don't have enough Hispanics on there. The hobbits are a race. Man is a race. The elvins are a race. The orcs are a race. People look at color and consider color that basically you have to put color in there. There is diversity in Lord of the Rings because there are many various different races. Do you get what I mean? Do you understand what I mean about that? The hobbits are not the same as man. The elves are not the same as hobbits. The orcs are not the same as hobbits. They're all variations of different races, different beliefs, different religions. You have to think about that for a minute. You have to put to the perspective that different races don't have to have different colors. They may have different looks to them. The dwarfs are different for the reason that the male and the female are similar. You can't distinguish between the male and the female. The hobbits, they have very large feet. They're short. Okay? The elves, very tall, thin, long-haired, ears. These are the things you have to understand. You have to stop looking to say, well, we have to have representation in there. There is representation. The representation is the world that J.R.R. Tolkien created many years ago. This is the world he created. He created it based on one part of Europe. If he made it, say, for example, over toward Asia, would you be complaining as well? Yes, you would. They would be complaining as well. See, this bullshit on the way that they've been treating stories lately is just incredible. You know, there's been many, and I'll bring this up, and you saw it in the intermission. I did, you know, those of you who have not seen my video on Asimov, when I was younger, in my early days of the business, I worked on a talk show. And this was back in my trade school days. I knew the gentleman that did the talk show. And basically, he brought on Isaac Asimov as a guest to discuss things of Asimov.
Most likely to survive of everything I've said. After all, I've published now at least 20 million words, so I have to figure it out, maybe even more. But of all those millions of words that I've published, I am convinced that 100 years from now, only 60 of them will survive. The 60 that make up the 3 laws of robotics.
All right. It's interesting. Yeah, it is.
Arrogant that Asimov is, but brilliant also at the same time. This is toward the time that we did this was toward the end of his life, because he died later on in the 90s. He had said he would only be remembered in history with only 60 words that he would only be remembered. 60 words. Those 60 words would be the laws of robotics. That would be the only thing that he would ever be remembered of all the millions of words that he written, put on paper. The stories, the things on that. And you see, his Foundation TV series is being slammed because it's not Isaac Asimov's foundation. It's Apple TV's foundation. And it's the same thing that happened with The Wrinkle of Time, The Wheel of Time, Dune. As much as people said, oh, Dune was a great movie, but that is not Frank Herbert's Dune. That is the blockbuster Dune. Because there were elements missing. You had diversity changes of characters. There were the missing characters that are very important to the storyline. So they've changed the storyline. Even though people had enjoyed it, but when you look to the perspective of Frank Herbert, it's not his novelization. They've bastardized a lot of these literary greats. And like I said, Asimov is right to the situation that he would only be remembered for only 60 words. 60 words. It's the same thing with every other writer. So we'll see how bad Lord of the Rings ends up to be, which it is already going to be a disaster. A disaster. Because again, and the thing about it is, I would say to Amazon, remove the Lord of the Rings part of it. They can keep the rings of whatever the fuck they want to call that, but remove the Lord of the Rings because it's not Lord of the Rings. This is never going to be Lord of the Rings. The funny part is, in the end, and this is where we played the geek song, is that, and before we switch over to the next topic, the fandom has been joining back together because of this. Will it stay together because of it? Who knows? Because you have people from all over the world, Portugal, Spain, Europe, Russia, South America, even here in the US, that have been criticizing Amazon for doing this to such a great, great story. A story that inspired many other movies, TV series, inspired many writers to write because of the stories themselves. It's a great story, Lord of the Rings. I recommend those of you who do read and never picked up this novel, do pick up Lord of the Rings. Pick up The Hobbit. Pick up The Silmarillion. Read what he is. Pick up the Letters of Tolkien. Read that as well. You'll learn a lot. And they waited until the son of Tolkien died to do this shit. If he was still alive, they would not be doing this. It's a shame. It's a shame. But this is what Hollywood does. And this is going to destroy Amazon. This is going to burn Amazon. Remember what I talked about last week about Tubi TV. AVOD is doing better than SVOD. Amazon is SVOD. Okay? So think about that for a minute.